Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much to IRF, first of all, for bringing me all over from the other corner of the world, the other end of the world exactly, 12 hours difference, to Malaysia once again. It's my pleasure to be here in this country for the 5th time. Thank you, dear Ambassador, for your remarks and opening vision that gave us a sense of the issue here. So, and thanks to you all, for coming here on a Sunday afternoon. I'm sure there are more interesting things to do out there, but you're here with us. Now, does freedom of conscience open the floodgates of apostasy? I will say no, and that's the summary of my speech. But I'll give you a longer version, before that. And if it opens to some individuals, it's their freedom. That's another part of my answer. But I will try to elaborate a little bit more on this issue, which I've thought a lot and written a lot. And I don't claim to be a religious authority. I'm not an imam. I'm not a religious scholar. I'm just a writer. I'm just a Muslim who thinks about the issues of the Muslim world. But when I speak about Islam, I refer to authorities in Islam. Some authorities maybe we forgot. Some authorities maybe we didn't pay much attention enough. Ultimately, there's no pope in Islam which can, have a statement that is valid for all. We all thinking Muslims have to think about our religion. So, first of all, let's begin with the idea of freedom. What does freedom mean? This morning, I put the advertisement, this very picture of this event on Twitter. And I said, if you're in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, I have this event, you can come. So I said, does freedom of conscience open the floodgates for apostasy? So a few minutes later, I saw a response to this tweet of mine on Twitter, which was very typical, and I think it's important. And the tweet said, I'm paraphrasing, it said, there's no freedom, there's no such thing as freedom. You either obey God's laws or you either don't. Now, I'm glad that came, because that's something I would like to always speak about. So that is the kind of response sometimes you get from fellow Muslims when you say freedom. They will say, well, what are you talking about freedom? In Islam, like even if you enter a club has rules, Islam has rules, so a Muslim has to obey the rules, right? Yes, but the question is, are you obeying those rules because you believe in God, because you believe in Islam, and because you want to worship God? Or are you obeying those laws because there is a police force that is monitoring you, that is forcing you to obey those laws? For example, a conservative, pious Muslim lady can wear a headscarf, decide to wear a headscarf. That is, that's how we mostly understand the commandment about Surah Al-Nur, about, Tasattur. Very respectable. So, but the question is she choosing to wear the headscarf? Or somebody makes her wear it, no matter what she thinks, as is the case in Saudi Arabia or Iran? Because there's an Islamic state, an Islamic regime, which forces people to, implement the commandments of God in the way that they understand on everybody. So, therefore, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in that sense, there's no freedom. In Malaysia, there is, because as I understand, there's no law about this, right? You can wear or not wear. So that's why we have ladies here who wear hijab, very respectful. We have ladies here who don't wear hijab, very respectful. It's their choice. It's their religious understanding. It's their background, and so on and so forth. So these are different things. So therefore, like in Ramadan, when the fasting month comes, do we give up our freedom to eat and drink during the day? Yes, we do that, but we do it by our own choice. But if there is a police force, like in Raqqa, under ISIS, which will jail and flog you if you eat during the Ramadan, maybe execute you, depending on the fiqh situation there, then there's no freedom. You are being coerced to practice Islam. So this issue, I think, since the very beginning of our great faith, has been an issue. And there has been Islamic interpretations, there have been Islamic schools of thought which emphasize that religion should be a matter based on freedom, that we should not be coerced. There have been other ones that think that no, you should coerce people because it's for their own good. It's good for the collective good, as it's put. Of course, when we speak of collective good, if we accept the notion of a collective conscience, we should consider if Christians say, well, we have a collective conscience and we don't allow apostasy, so if a Christian apostatizes and becomes a Muslim, we will execute that person. If a Christian says that, what are we going to think about that? We Muslims should consider that. So this is an important issue and a burning issue, I think. And I think this is more important in the modern world today because the idea of individual freedom has become a global value more than ever. People are more educated than ever. People have become more thinking for themselves thanks to education, thanks to technology, thanks to travel, and it's just a more individualistic world than before, and that's just sociology. You can't do anything about it. People move from tribes to nations and ultimately individualism. So this is happening. So as Muslims, we have to face this issue and ask, is freedom a value for us? Should we accept freedom? And in this case, freedom of conscience, in our topic today. Now, what is freedom of conscience? I'll give you just a dictionary definition. Oxford Dictionary defines it as the right to follow one's beliefs in matters of religion and morality. Now, do we have a basis for this in Islam? I will say absolutely yes. If you read the Quran, the only undisputed source for all Muslims, there are very strong verses that emphasize this very freedom. La ikraha fid din. There is no compulsion in religion. Mr. Ambassador read some of those verses. The truth is from your Lord. Let anyone who want to believe it, believe it. Let anyone who want to disbelieve it, disbelieve it. Another verse says, if God willed, everybody on earth would have believed. Can you force men to be believers? So there are many verses in the Quran which seem to emphasize that religion is not something that you can impose on people. It should be their free choice. However, the Quran is not the only source that defines the Islamic tradition that we have. If you look at post-Quranic sources, if you look at secondary sources, that includes the Hadith collection, and that includes the fiqh developed in the, let's say, early centuries of Islam by both Sunni and Shia jurisprudence. You will see that in 4 Sunni madhabs, and in the Jafari, the 5th madhab. By the way, I think Shia are Muslim too, and we have 5 madhabs there in that sense. I think people have different ideas about that too. To me, everybody who professes to be a Muslim is a Muslim. So we have big 5 madhab there, Sunni and Shia. They all think that apostasy is a crime. We come to apostasy. That is punishable by that. So the La ikraha fid din verse seems to tell us that there should be no coercion in religion. But when you look at the secondary sources of Islam, when you look at the madhabs, when you look at the jurisprudence, you will see that, actually our medieval scholars, most of them, not all of them, but most of them thought that apostasy, which is to change your religion and stop being a Muslim and become the follower of something else. You can becoming an atheist or becoming a Christian. That is considered as a crime punishable by death. Welcome to our, speakers. Glad to have a bigger, fuller table there. And I would love to get the feedback and, different views, hopefully from there and the audience as well. So that's why this issue of apostasy is an important issue. And as I understand, in Malaysia, apostasy is not a crime punishable by death, but there are controversies around it. Can a Malay, actually abandon Islam and, choose another religion? Some people think that should not be allowed. There are already some legal obstacles on that and so on and so forth. Now, here are a few thoughts about this. Imagine a pious Muslim somehow loses his faith. He doesn't feel anymore about Islam. When he hears the Quran, he doesn't feel anymore like that. He's influenced by certain ideas, whatever, somehow. A Muslim loses his faith and happens to be a Christian, or just becomes an atheist. And we are telling him, well, if you declare that, we will kill you. because apostasy is a crime punishable by death. Well, we don't kill you in Malaysia, but in Saudi Arabia and Iran and in Yemen, in Afghanistan, a death penalty would be given to this person. Under ISIS for sure, I mean, they will execute him right away. Now, by saying this, by having this threat to this person, what are we achieving? Does he say, wonderful, thanks so much for this threat, now I've become a good mu'min and I'm filled with, my faith is filled with iman, and he's crying, and probably not, right? I mean, what do you achieve? At best, you probably make this person a munafiq, a hypocrite. To save himself from this threat, from the pressure, he will say, okay, I'm a Muslim, but in secret he will not. Probably his apostasy will be doubled because he will feel persecuted by Muslims and Islam, and he will have a more negative attitude towards Islam. So there is something bizarre about this whole idea that while we have this La ikraha fid din commandment, we also have this idea that apostates should be punished. So where this is coming from? Now, just to give you a few textual references on that, I mean, I would recommend the writings of Abdullah Said, a professor who spent a lot of thought and ink on this matter, and he's based in Australia. He's a Muslim scholar. He has several books and articles on this issue, and he studied the issue of apostasy. I mean, he explains there, but it's also very clear for anybody who wants to look at it. There's nothing in the Quran that bans apostasy. There is simply no verse in the Quran that people who abandon Islam has to be given earthly punishment. I mean, the Quran says unbelievers will go to hell, but that's an afterlife, right? And nothing about this life. Actually, there are verses which indicate that actually you can apostatize because it's your choice. Freedom, truth is from God. Believe it or disbelieve it. That's in the Quran. But when you look at Hadith collection, there are two different things. One is that when you look at the Hadiths, we also see that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, never punished anybody for apostasy. There is no recorded incident in the Hadith collection or Sirah, his biographies. We have no incident of somebody being executed under Prophet Muhammad in Medina or Mecca. I mean, it couldn't be possible in Mecca, but even in Medina. Nobody we know executed for apostasy. There is yet still a simple one-sentence hadith in Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari, which says, whoever leaves his religion, kill him. So that is the basis of the ban on apostasy and the medieval jurisprudence based on that. However, this hadith appeared 4 decades after Prophet Muhammad. It was narrated by Ibn Abbas, who was just 12 years old when Prophet Muhammad died. And before that, we have no incident of actually apostasy against him in this light. So there are scholars who think that, who have some doubt about the authenticity of this hadith. And I totally share that doubt. And I also add that, I mean, in my understanding, hadith cannot override the Quran. Because hadiths are reported deeds, but we can never 100% be sure about the authenticity of a hadith, whereas we have no doubt about the authenticity of the Quran as Muslims. So therefore, I would not take that hadith as a reason to override the freedom that is given in the Quran. Moreover, when you look at the history of early Islam, you see that the idea that apostates have been killed were adopted and used by some despotic Muslim states, like the Umayyad Empire. One of the first apostates in Islam that was executed by the Umayyads was Ghaylan al-Dimashqi. Have you heard this name? Ghaylan al-Dimashqi? He was not an apostate, he was a proud Muslim, he was a pious Islamic scholar. He was an alim, but he was executed as an apostate. Why? Because during the Umayyad Empire, there was which is, like after the first Rashidun Caliphate, after the first, let's say, 30 years, we have a century of Umayyad rule. And Umayyad sultans should not be always put in the same basket. There are maybe 2 ones that are maybe more pious and more respectable than others, but there are despotic Umayyad sultans like Yazid and several others. So under the Umayyads, there was a big discontent with the Umayyad rule in Muslim masses. because they were corrupt, they were just empowering their own people, they were nepotistic. So this led the Umayyads to look for a theological, a religious justification for their rule. I mean, if you're a politician, you want to get support from the masses, using religion always works. In the 7th century, in the 21st century, it works in every corner of the world, unless you live in an aggressively, atheistic society. So there was the theological dispute that they found interesting and helpful was a dispute between Muslim theologians who thought that God has given humans free will, and versus the theologians who thought that God didn't give us any free will. We humans have no right to choose anything. We are just like leaves in the wind, as they put it. Everything is predestined. Like everything is predestined by God, we have no choice. So the people who thought that there is free will were called Qadariya. Don't confuse it with the idea of Qadar as predestination. Here the Qadar means power, so God has given us power. The other people were called Jabriya. Jabriya in Arabic means enforcement. So they thought that God enforces everything on us. We have no free will. And the other people said we have free will. Now, Umayyads loved the predestination Jabriya doctrine. Why? Because they thought, this is wonderful for us to justify our rule. Because if everything is predestined by God, Umayyad rule is predestined by God as well. So people should not oppose us. We are sitting on the throne because God wills it. How do you oppose God's, qadar, God's predestination? That's why they supported the predestinarians, the Jabriya school, and they executed two of the prominent voices in the Qadari, in the free will school. And one of them was Gailan al-Damashqi. He has written that sultans cannot consider power as a gift of God or as a predestined, position by God. They are responsible to the people. So they have to be just to the people. They have to uphold justice. And if they're not, people have a right to oppose the sultan. And he was declared an apostate, right? Because the Umayyad empire, said the predestinarian school, the Jabriya school is the right understanding. That's the right doctrine. They declared him an apostate. His hands were chopped off. His feet were chopped off. Then he was hanged after all that torture. So that's one of the first apostates in our history, which was actually a pious Muslim who just questioned political authority. So I think we should also see that apostasy, the ban on apostasy, might have simply arose from the political needs of early Muslim states rather than the Quran itself. I mean, it has no basis in the Quran. But the fact that some hadiths appeared at some point about this issue gives us the clue that maybe it was all political. And it was used for political reasons throughout Islamic history. A lot of people were executed as apostate, and it's going on today too. In the 20th century, under so-called Islamic states we have today, people who are pious Muslims but who question the regime or who just have a different doctrine rather than the regime's doctrine can easily be declared as heretics and apostates, and the apostasy ban is a good way to silence them rather than try to criticize their. So therefore, I think this whole apostasy ban Islam is a later invention, not in the Quran, not in Prophet Muhammad's practice, which is a medieval doctrine that evolved in the culture of the time. One more thing we should add here, though. We should also see that, and this is maybe this gives some justification to the idea of banning apostasy at that time. In early Islam, during that Middle Eastern setting, apostasy also meant changing your side during a military conflict. So it's also possible that early ulama, scholars, not just for political reasons, but for understandable reasons, they thought that apostates are heretics that should be punished because they consider an apostate as somebody who leaves the Muslims and joins the enemy during a battle, during war. That is probably why the Hanafi scholars, Hanafi, one of the four Sunni schools, they reasoned that apostates should be executed only if they are males. Female apostates should not be executed. Why? because females were not soldiers in medieval warfare. I mean, so there is that context too. So I think we should understand fiqh in its own historical context. So that can be a reason too for the evolution of the idea that apostates should be punished. However, in the modern world today, when people change their religion, they don't join an enemy army, you know, fighting another army. So national citizenship and, you know, are different things, and your religious allegiance and your national allegiance have become totally different things. Most people are not soldiers anyway, so that even if it had an understandable context, I think that's something that we should leave in history. So my argument is that, and this is, who am I? Like, I'm not an authority, but also like prominent scholars, like Rashid Ghannouchi in Tunisia, for example, or Ayatollah Montazeri, who passed away a few years ago in Iran from the Shiite side. Many prominent Islamic scholars in the past couple of decades have come and said the ban on apostasy should be abandoned. This should be seen as not a nas coming from the Quran. It's just a medieval jurisprudence, and it shouldn't be practiced anymore. And if you practice it, what do you achieve? You make people, I mean, hypocrites. We already mentioned that. But once you say this, you know, some Muslims will ask the question here. Oh, but if you allow it, what about, you know, people will leave Islam in masses and millions of Muslims will be out there, you know, becoming Christians or atheists and Buddhists. First of all, to think like that shows that we lack some self-confidence in our faith. Like, are we keeping people in Islam because we are threatening them by death if they leave it? I mean, I'm a Muslim not because somebody says, I'll kill you if you leave Islam. I'm a Muslim because, alhamdulillah, I'm a Muslim. I believe in Islam. I was born to a Muslim family, of course. There's a culture, there's a history, but I have faith in Islam. Probably you are all like that. I mean, the ones who are Muslim here in this audience, and respect the ones who are not, of course. I mean, to think that if there's no enforcement, we will not be Muslims anymore, or some of us will not be, that doesn't really show a very mature, you know, understanding of any faith. Second, well, I mean, this is just speculation, but objectively speaking, in Muslim societies where you have no ban on apostasy, are Muslims leaving Islam in like droves and millions? No. I'm coming from Turkey. Not just since the beginning of the Turkish Republic in 1923, since middle of the 19th century under the Ottoman Empire, we don't have an apostasy ban. Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Caliphate, rendered the ban on apostasy obsolete in the middle of the 19th century during Tanzimat reforms. It became possible in late Ottoman Empire to change your religion if you want to. Did millions of Ottoman Turks no, nobody changed it. There were a few secular intellectuals who wrote books about, you know, materialism and so on and so forth. They were not executed for that. That's why Ottoman Islamic scholars wrote books criticizing the philosophy of materialism and atheism in late Ottoman Empire, and that brought intellectual vitality to the Muslim scene. But, I mean, the fact that there's no ban on apostasy didn't make Turkey's Muslims less pious. Throughout the Turkish Republic, we had no Sharia, no fiqh in our legislation. Actually, Islam was not encouraged but discouraged at times, especially in the early decades of the Republic. Turks didn't become apostates en masse, and some of them became more secular in their lifestyle, but very few people jumped to the other side and, you know, took another religion. I mean, it's just people don't change religion that easily. I mean, it's not, especially if we believe in Islam, why would we fear that? So the question, does freedom of conscience open the floodgate to apostasy, is no, it doesn't. I mean, I think that's not something we should fear. But I'll tell you one more thing. There might be something that might open the floodgate to apostasy. And that can be the very ban on apostasy and the whole authoritarian understanding of Islam itself. I've seen apostates. I've seen Muslims who say, I'm an ex-Muslim, I left Islam. I've seen them in the West. I talk with them like, okay, why did you stop being a Muslim? They said, my family was persecuted under the Iranian regime. In Saudi Arabia, the imams are so narrow-minded and they punish everything. They just complained from the authoritarianism that is being produced under the name of Islam. They apostatized not because apostasy is left free. They apostatized because they said, what is this? Why is this kind of authoritarian religion that is coming after us? A lot of Saudis, I mean, there are a lot of young Saudis who go to West and they're fed up with the religion police. They want to be religious as they understand. Some of them maybe go away from Islam precisely because they feel humiliated and threatened, and they stop respecting Islam because of the practices they see in the name of Islam. Therefore, I think it is time for us to understand that we are living in a modern open world. You can't put people in a box and say you will not go out of this. They will go out of that precisely because of that. If we want to preserve our Islamic legacy, if we want to strengthen our faith, if we want to make Islam appeal to more people in the world, and if we want to make Muslims more proud of themselves, more pious, the only thing we can do is not to impose, but to propose, to tell Islam better, to show better examples of Muslimness, to show a Muslim morality, ethics, to build Muslim societies where people can admire, to show that, not to impose that. And the more we try to impose that, I think we will make a great harm to Islam rather than defending Islam. One more thing. I'm coming from Turkey, and Turkey has been defined by a very hardcore authoritarian secularism from the very beginning. It's a secularism that I criticized a lot, because I think authoritarianism can come from the name of religion. Authoritarianism can come from secularism as well. And I think I make a distinction between a secular state, which I would accept and support, and a secularist state, which, tries to ban the hijab, for example, as in the French model and the early Republican Turkish model. So we had one big problem with that. But this secular state didn't really secularize Turkish society that much. I mean, go to Turkey, check Ramadans, people go to mosques, and it's still a very religious society. Some people say, actually, Turkey is society-wise more religious than Iran, despite the fact that Iran is an Islamic republic and Turkey is a secular republic. So state's imposition doesn't make people religious. It can be the other way around. But lately, there's a discussion in Turkey that more and more young Turks are moving away from Islam. They are becoming deists. I don't know if you heard this term, deist, but deist is somebody who believes in a God but no religion. So there's the idea of a vague creator, but they don't believe in any religion. So, Islamic writers are saying youngsters are becoming deists, that's a problem, and so on and so forth. And why is that happening? Because Islam and politics have become so intertwined in Turkey in the past 5-10 years. We are seeing a growingly authoritarian, intimidating political language in the name of Islam. And the people who feel threatened by that, people who feel humiliated by that, say, I don't like this anymore. And this includes the authoritarian state and the religion that it takes, as a justification for itself. Therefore, we should, if we want to do something for Islam, we should first begin by articulating an understanding of Islam that is not authoritarian, that's not aggressive, that is tolerant, that is pluralistic, and that is appreciative of freedom. It's a freedom we need also we need that freedom to be Muslims in the way that we understand, not as the authorities understand. There are different sects of Islam, there are different interpretations of Islam. In the Sunni world, there's so many diversity, even besides the Sunni world, there's so many. To be able to live it in the way we understand, what we need is not an authoritarian state that will protect us from apostasy, but a democratic liberal state that will grant us freedom. Freedom is the only thing we need from politics. Thank you so much.